good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 4 of the TWC New Directors Meeting. Thank you for joining us this morning. This morning, we have a great lineup and very informative, a lot of information to be shared. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ann Savino. Thank you, Ann.
Great. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4. I'm Ann Savino, and it's nice to be here. You've had a lot of information this week, and I'm hoping to give you a brief introduction to integrated education and training. So I want to start by saying there is a lot of content around IETs. We only have an hour, so I'm not going to be taking a deep dive into the weeds, although probably most of my colleagues know that's where I live. So for those of you new to the service model, I'm really going to try to give you some clear takeaways and some thoughtful ways to really approach going forward and building IETs. And then for those of you with lots of expertise, consider this a refresher and really a chance to see and look at how your thinking and your current services on these models are aligned to the intention of this option. So really, those of you with a lot of expertise, as I was saying, consider this a refresher and a chance to think about how you are thinking about these models and what your current services look like and the intention that I'm really going to talk about today. Over the course of the next year, we will be having new PD on these topics that will serve to give you more depth. So we should have an announcement about that sometime in early July. So I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to sharing with you today. So having said, I'm not going to take a deep dive. Here's a glance at some of the questions I get in email. And I want to encourage you to complete the follow-up survey to help us address your needs for getting your questions answered in general about IETs. I am going to be doing a brief introduction, as I said. So as we move through this, if you think of questions you have, don't hesitate. If it doesn't look like I'm going to get that much into the weeds about this, please email them to us at our AELTA box. This will really help us prioritize the weekly Q&A as we go forward. And then some of these questions I may address, and you may find a good time to pop in and ask a question that's relevant to what we're talking about. So that's, so let me ask you, as you look at these questions, why don't you put in the chat pod if there's a number, like number 8, I really want to know the answer to number 8, or number 12, anything here that looks interesting to you.
We have a 1, Ann.
Oh, we have a number 1, good. Mm-hmm. So that is probably our biggest challenge. So that, Lavana. Thank you, Lavana.
We have another 1.
Another one. Those are some of our experts out there in the field, and I think I recognize people I'm getting questions with. So we actually are thinking about doing a separate webinar just talking about those MSGs, and there are some great resources. And if I didn't share that on the resource page when I get to that, I'll make sure that I send that out to everyone. So MSGs are highly important to everyone. Okay, good to know. Okay, so let me tell you what I'm really going to try to accomplish in an hour. And for most of the people that we've been speaking to this week, we're really speaking about starting up and getting these concepts down if they've never done an IET or aren't familiar with career pathways. So I am going to be pretty high level. And I'm also going to do this a little bit differently than I've ever done it before. So I'll be interested in how this works for you. So my overall key takeaways is I really want you to understand what an IET is, what the model is, want to clarify the components, what is it? Review the IET model for English language learners. We're doing that a little bit differently on the back end for you all, hopefully making it easy, but we want to ensure that our English language learners are well served. And then some things about how to get started. So let's see what we've got next here. All right, this is one of your major resources, and I've written the URL here at the bottom of the page. A couple of resources I'm going to call out to you if you haven't looked at, or if you didn't do the large group a day-long training on developing a basic skills curriculum that we had a few years back with Penn State. If you didn't participate in that, you want to really take a look at this book, Developing a Basic Skills Curriculum for an IET. It is on the webpage. Also, the OCTAE IET guides and the Integrated EL Civics checklists are also there. Those are formal national publications that will help you also thinking about your IETs and your Integrated EL Civics. Also, for you all who have done this many times, you're familiar that we require an implementation plan. We call it the survey. So that implementation plan, you can see PDFs of that on the website. So those PDFs are good to look at. And actually, I think they're a good planning tool. They help you see in alignment with the AEL requirements exactly what the model is. So this is another webinar that I'm looking at doing. If you're interested in looking at the survey in a 1-hour webinar, I think that would be a great way to walk you through some of the requirements in a little bit different perspective. So definitely look at the PDF before you go in and try to answer that survey, because it will be challenging if you don't have your plan down. There are also a few IET tools that we've just generated from our office, and you may find links to that. I will say that Jorge's been doing it, or Tikal, the webmaster, is doing great updates for this. And so you may see if any of the links are broken. We've been working on that this week and doing a few additions of items that you'll want to make sure you take a look at. And then also something we always get questions on, and we can spend a good 45 minutes talking about a training service, how to set up a training service in Teams and the correct ways to do that. So those are all items that are on the website. Great resource. Please make sure you take some time to look at it. So we have a lot of policy. Maria's been talking a lot about the policy this week, and we are looking at the same policy pieces that Maria referenced. The IET letters, the next slide is going to show you a list of letters so that you have kind of a good look at what contains guidance for our IETs. And also those letters are specifically available at the TCAL website under the Career Pathway Institute. I find I keep myself a PDF booklet of all the relevant letters for IETs. That's really helpful. It's hard. You don't like to, you don't want to go to the website and have to download those all the time. So make yourself a book or go to our website here and make sure that you know where those letters are for quick reference. And here are the main policy letters, and just take a minute to look at those. Yeah, take a moment to just look at all of the letters that really impact the design of an IET. And as I said, we could really do an hour on many of these letters in and of themselves. And hopefully over the next year, we'll just be rolling out a lot more PD. We get a lot of questions about required syllabus. We get a lot of questions about how do you design co-learning objectives. And that's one of my favorite topics. So we're looking at how we can share more of that information broadly with you over the next year. So those are some of the policy pieces. Now let me share a few tools that you're going to want to make sure are in your toolkit. Yes.
There was a question. Is there a guide or written instruction on how to set up training services in Teams on TCO or on TCO website?
Yes. Now, look under the Integrated EL Civics model. I think it's there. The link on the IETs we're fixing. So you may see coming soon, how to set up a training service. And also just email your program specialists, and actually over our break, I can get a copy of it and have it emailed out to this list group. We may be making some changes in terms of how we want you to enter a training service in Teams. And so it might be for the new year. So if you've got a process down for this year that you're using, I really probably wouldn't change it. If you need to see that list, though, look on the website, especially under Integrated EL Civics. If it's not there, it may be by the end of the day. It depends on our progress on some of these changes, but we can get it to you, Tara. So another couple of good resources here just to highlight them. They're the iTech plan. Obviously, those are local tools that you all have designed or used. It's very important for our integrated education and training students, and also how you're approaching your local comprehensive assessment model. And that's really, how do you help people with their barriers? How do you move people forward into the right pathway? Okay, so let's get started with a little bit bigger picture, career pathways. So overall, it is the federal guidance for career pathway, along with federal guidance on integrated education and training, that informs what we're able to do to serve AEL students with a career pathway option and to pay for training. I'm probably going to spend about 10 minutes here connecting the dots on some background as to why we do IETs and how important they are overall as a model for lower skilled or your ELL individuals who need really unique support in their basic skills. So bear with me as I spend a few slides to communicate this. I know it may be basics, but I want to make sure that we really start with this kind of understanding. So here's just an illustration. You hear the term career ladder. It's a great way to see the progression of skills from entry level to upper level as an occupational ladder. You know, we talk often of career ladders, your workforce boards do. Here's a career pathway. This is an example of something very traditional. It lays out the progression of courses over time that someone might take to, maybe somebody graduated from high school, maybe they had some dual credit in this industry and wanted to continue on pursuing a mechanical engineering degree. So overall, these are kind of the big picture. And so when we talk about career pathway, according to the federal definition under WIOA, it's really a series of connected education and training programs, services that enable people to secure, advance, and employment within a very specific industry or occupational sector. A career pathway approach to education and training really enables people to advance over time to successfully higher levels of education and employment, pretty much like that career ladder I just showed you. So career pathways are very key strategies in workforce development. So the question I want to talk about is, where does adult education fit into the workforce development system? So talking about adult education, for most of us, our pathway really extends from birth to retirement. And we need to stay on a path in order to develop some kind of economic security. People stop moving forward. Sometimes they fall off the pathway at some point, and for a variety of reasons. And we know that this often happens to our adult ed students. They weren't showing up for work on time consistently. The supervisor warned them. They eventually were fired. They didn't take time to speak with a supervisor. They had a relative or a transportation issue or a childcare issue, so they lost their job. We hear that scenario, I think, very well with our adult education students. So the workforce system is ideally designed as really the safety net for those life events to support people when they fall off the path. For adults, we have SNAP choices, TANF. We have Texas Unemployment Insurance. We know that over this last year, that's been a very important safety net for individuals. We have job training through Title I. We have vocational rehab services that suddenly, may be needed by individuals as the result of some kind of accident or trauma. We have then, of course, adult education. All of these programs all together and individually really have as the goal to help people move forward, help people move into work or better work, help them gain the skills they need through education and training, and move into career pathway employment. Because it's really career pathway employment that helps us move out of poverty and get some stability in our lives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the tipping point study. We often talk about this when we talk about integrated education and training. I want to thank Judy Mortrube and Minnesota ABE because they've really done a good design on how to look at this. And when we talk about, the tipping point study, we really look at one another, in terms of assets and in terms of skills and abilities. Our life assets, are they stable? Are they unstable? Do people have homes, housing, working cars, little or no debt, consistent employment? On the other hand, there are often individuals who enter adult education with what we probably would recognize as unstable assets. And they lack the advantages of education, good jobs, economic, financial support. Some adult ed students come in our programs that have never attended a school at any time in their lives. And then there are those that didn't persist through high school, didn't persist, maybe just didn't have an opportunity to have education in their home country. An employer might ask you to provide services and you find 10 different language backgrounds in the workplace, but no one really, that's bringing them together to share safety information. So adult education is really helping those that are very much in need. And over the course of the last 4 decades has really focused on raising people's literacy skills to the level required to be successful at the workplace. And for many years, we actually thought that was 8th grade. I think maybe some of you all remember that there was a time when 8th grade and reading at an 8th grade level was considered appropriate for being employed and having a stable job. In more recent decades, it really became the high school diploma. We focus on the high school equivalency or the GED. And we all know that as the economy changes, the educational requirements for quality work, quality employment, quality lifestyle changes. So primarily as a result of the Washington State Tipping Point study, adult basic education programs began acknowledging that a year of post-secondary education and an industry recognized credential was the minimum level required to successfully participate in the workforce and move out of poverty. So when we look at our customer again, when we think about who we serve, Mahalia talked about those who don't have a high school diploma, 18 to 24-year-olds. We have 13.9% that don't have a high school diploma. 25 over the age of 25, people that are likely to have families and struggling with low wages. 1.4 million have less than a 9th grade education. 2.8 million, it's estimated to lack a high school diploma or equivalent. So low-skilled workers are the last to be hired and often the first to be fired. This is the statistic that Mahalia showed the other day during her presentation. So overall educational attainment is down in Texas and it's down across the country, which has direct impact on economic recovery, prosperity, and very dramatically on people's lives. 19% of Texans lack basic prose literacy. 9.4 speak a language other than English and report themselves that they speak English less than well. So let's go back to career pathways and the definition under WIOA. and what opportunities this has really afforded us. And under WIOA, the definition is codified. It's a definition that deepens the commitment and requirements for cross-agency coordination and partnerships. As an AEL provider, you cannot do an effective career pathway program or an integrated education and training program without collaboration and partnerships. So if you look at this federal definition, the federal definition very much mirrors the definition of integrated education and training. And that I'm going to review in more depth also. But I'm just trying to establish the fact that we have this great opportunity. I know that we in Texas have been taking advantage of it for the last 5 years. Many more states are getting or providing this option as adult education and literacy, and looking deeply at these partnerships and how the workforce system works together. So as another note about that, more recently, and this was in 2016, there was a joint letter that was published. And when joint letters come out across, nationally, that there is the push and there is the support to really look at integrating services and collaboration and cross-agency support. And actually, if we go back to, I think it was 2010 or 2012, we had this same letter, a joint letter supporting career pathways, but we only had the Department of Ed, the Department of Labor, and the Department of Health and Human Services that signed on. Now, 2016, we have 12 federal agencies that signed a joint letter. And I always think back to the college president I worked for, and he used to say, well, when you're trying to make change in a large organization, it's like turning a battleship. It takes time. So I know in 2014, WIOA passed. We were an early implementer of integrated education and training. And we are still working at these integration strategies across our system. And you need support from us, certainly at the state level, to enable and support those reporting requirements. And I think we have to keep working together in order to make all of this happen. So the overall goal for adult education within our strategic plan is definitely, as Maria mentioned the other day, about advancing career pathway systems to transition lower skilled students to post-secondary education and employment. So back to that tipping point study, we know if people don't get that industry credential, don't get something, they are going to have less of an opportunity moving out of poverty and getting a good job. Okay, now I'm going to get back a little bit to the ground floor here in Texas. Okay, so we framed our work around career pathways early on, and we're able to do these services. We have under career pathway models. So we use that big umbrella to talk about what we do in adult education and literacy. And our models are the integrated education and training model. That's what we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth here, at least to get you started. And we also have the integrated EL civics model, which is a model that actually really does, the intention of that model has a lot of intention to help individuals integrate into our system across the state and the nation, and to become important citizens in respect to having opportunities to work and be proficient in their language and opportunities across the US. So those are the two areas that are very much aligned to what we saw as the definition of career pathways under WIOA. We then also have, sorry, I went a little bit too far there. I just want to make a note. I'm going to talk the third hour. In between me is going to be distance ed. And the third hour, we're going to talk about intensive services, which are all those other services at the bottom, which is services for internationally trained, transition to reentry, and workplace AEL. So someone asked yesterday kind of the difference in intensive and your IET models. And this here is a look at how we we really frame it up. So we use this global term career pathways, but it's probably much more communicative to use the integrated education and training, IETL, civics, and intensive services. So here's Mario. I'm just going to mention him and try to bring him back into the scenario and think about him because he represents possibly somebody that we're working with in our adult ed class. He works at a fulfillment center in San Marcos. He has a child with his girlfriend. He dropped out of high school at 10th grade. He's working on his high school equivalency at night, but not really. It's online. He's struggling with reading and math, and he actually hated school. Through a program's integrated or comprehensive assessment, these details will tease out. So going back and connecting with that process of how do you get to know Mario? How do you understand his circumstances? And how can you start to put him and support him in whatever pathway is appropriate for him? Occasionally, his shift gets cut back in hours. That's never good. He wants to keep his job, wants to raise and a promotion. So maybe he hasn't found adult education yet. Where might he end up in our workforce system? Put that in the chat. Anybody have an idea where Mario with those kinds of characteristics might interface with our workforce system? No matter what part of it, whether it's AEL, whether it's UI, whether it's et cetera. Any feedback there? I know this is pretty big picture stuff, but when we look at it, people's individuals' lives when they're in our programs, I think these are the things that we learn about them. And when we look at what we're gathering on the Pearl and requirement for adult education and literacy, that Pearl information is very much aligned to what all of our other partners in the workforce system are gathering. Finding out where we intersect is important. So I don't think I have anybody putting any ideas out there, but I put a few.
That's right. Nothing yet.
Nothing yet. Tara, all right. Great. Yeah, he might end up in our high school equivalency. And actually, she's suggesting a high school equivalency and IET simultaneously. I like that. That's a great idea. Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thanks for jumping in there. All right, so let's get a little bit grainier about an IET. I see it's about 9 o'clock. I think I'm doing pretty good. I'll keep trying to move on here. So I haven't defined it for you. We've kind of danced around it. What keywords would you use to describe it? What are you doing? Are you getting ready to launch something? If you have IETs, give me a few words that really capture what an IET is, whether it's something is a requirement or it's just something that's a component of what you're doing. Put a few words in the chat. Come on, I got to wake you guys up here. Tell me a little bit about an IET. Give me a few keywords. Oh, I like it. Maggie, contextualization. Excellent. Collaboration with a training program. Perfect. Yeah, workforce training. Great. Keywords. I love it. Jennifer, thank you. Good feedback. Credential. All right, Carla, thank you very much. Exactly. So here is that definition, and I'm going to hit on some of the keywords here. We actually spend a couple of hours sometimes deconstructing this definition because there's so much information that's important to really get to know. For instance, an overall scope of services. That's a brief phrase, but it's really talking about something that would look as a program of study, a series of connected education and training. We're talking about a scope of services, a career pathway. We've got the 3 IET components. We also call these the core components. So that's an important construct. I will go more deeply into that. And then, of course, integrated services. For an IET program to be an effective part of a pathway, it needs to be focused on an industry sector. It needs to be rigorous and provide support to participants to help them along the way. So integrated services is an important part of this. What Maggie and Jennifer had mentioned, attaining gaining the skills that participants need to succeed in a workforce training program by attaining a recognized post-secondary credential. In Texas, and this is unique in Texas, we really underscore this need to attain a recognized post-secondary credential. An individual you serve in an IET program will enter your credential denominator. They have a year to attain the credential, but they are in the credential denominator by virtue of being enrolled in an IET and AEL. So, point of reference, you want to get to that credential. And what does that credential mean? That credential really means that's the tipping point for that individual, that they actually may be able to move with more education as their education rate increases, the poverty rate decreases. Once again, this is back to US Census data. And then just another point again, to the tipping point. That's the connectivity between all of these activities. We have said an IET is about 3 core components, and those core components are really to get people to this tipping point so that they can get employed and get jobs and support their families. So let's look a little bit more deeply at the core components delivered through integrated services. This is your AEL activities. So AEL activities, we've been talking about those all week. We've been talking about programs that teach math, that teach reading, that teach language proficiency, all of those digital literacy, all of those are AEL activities. One of the requirements under integrated education and training is that adult education activity needs to be provided, contextualized to the training. So I think it was Maggie who put in the chat that it needs to be contextualized instruction in whatever the basic skills need is for that specific occupation. So you need to use occupationally relevant instructional materials. So how do you do that? I mean, one of the ways that we're looking at collaboration, we're adult ed teachers, we're reading teachers, writing teachers, language teachers, high school equivalency. We're not welders, we're not nurses, we're not EMTs. So working with that workforce partner, back again to where we started with collaboration, is super important. And often those workforce trainers know very much about where those students struggle, even the ones that come into their programs through whatever door. It may not be through an AEL door, just through a normal door and self-pay. They know where they may be struggling. So they're great resources in building your services. This obviously is a research-based program. We want you to use most current research. These need to be, and this is the piece that I want to underscore, because I think we're going to take a deeper dive into this next year, is our adult education and literacy programs that are doing IETs. We want to see that people are getting sufficient intensity and quality to provide for advancement. So that is a challenging piece to put into an IET. And it means that you have to collaborate with your workforce training partner, because your workforce training partner is often ready to deliver their training. You come in the door, we're going to teach you to be a welder. We're not worrying about your basic skills. You can either catch up or not. So think about, and I'm going to ask you as we go on, how that collaboration can expand for an integrated education and training. And then the single set of learning objectives, that is something that I'm looking forward to having some more depth on over the fall, and being able to work with people on developing single set of learning objectives. We've had opportunities to get more materials on that, and I'll be sharing that at a later time. And then, of course, it's super important that all of this needs to make sense within the Texas AEL content standards. We do require a syllabus for all programs, and that doesn't matter whether it's an integrated education and training program or it's your high school equivalency program. Over the last 2 years, you've been required to develop a syllabus. So the syllabus is also required for all of your integrated education and training programs. So let's talk about the second component of an integrated education and training. So this is really your workforce preparation activities. And as you look at this list of what we frame up as workforce preparation activities, it's very broad. You can see how you can integrate this with your adult ed activities. So there's lots of flexibility you have when you design your model. You could design integrating workforce preparation within the scope of your program and just naturally in your adult education component, if that's what you want to do. That's an option. That may work best for you. You can use workforce preparation activities as helping people with their digital literacy skills, very specifically, perhaps before they start their workforce training. Time management is important, skills for knowing what college is about and college and career knowledge. How to use information. All of that are things that are kind of your basic skills, whether they're done in the context of preparing for work or in the context of an adult education class. We often hear, and this is completely great, that your workforce prep is that portion of your class when you're helping someone find a job. They've finished their training, so you're going to prepare them to get into that work culture. What's it like to drive a truck? You're going to be up for 10 hours. If the training didn't prepare you for this, you're going to come in and help prepare them also for looking for that job, interviewing for that job, preparing a resume, and being able to talk about the skills that they've acquired while they were in your integrated education and training. And people really need that kind of support. Getting out of a program with a training provider, just finishing the kind of competencies they might have taught. There are a lot of other pieces to that puzzle to being able to get that job and that occupation. So that's why workforce preparation activities were identified as an important component of an integrated education and training. Okay, workforce training. So we have very specific workforce training opportunities. On-the-job training is a very specific workforce system type of training. Requires an employer, requires a certain wage. Your workforce board is very familiar with that. Most likely when you're doing your integrated education and training, you are doing occupational skills training. So workforce training. So this will help you, obviously, when you get in to set up a training service. You have to set up a training service. You have to tell our team system what is the actual training service about. And that's where you select what kind of training you are doing. Occupational skills training is most likely what we want to see. And I have a short PowerPoint that kind of works you through all of these components. We're going to get that out there on the website probably in July also. So let's talk a little bit more about why does this work? Why does integrated education and training help our adult education students to work, to get the basic skills they need and the training? Give me some, put something in the chat. I mean, what is it about doing workforce training, basic skills, employment activities, workforce prep together that makes this model work? I mean, it works so well that it got put in federal legislation twice. It got put in there as a career pathway, and it got put in there specifically as integrated education and training. So why do we get to do it? Why does it work? Why does it help individuals? Yeah, great. Holistic. It connects the dots. Great answers. We're addressing all the needs. It's well-rounded. Great. Students are aware of their goals since they're linked to employment and their livelihood. Fabulous. Those are things that are exactly what I was looking for. It expedites their path to employment. Oh, I like that, Ashley. Closing gaps, and providing enough support. Great answers. Thank you all very much. Some of the other reasons it works is what the research says, and really along what you're saying, students are engaged. What they're learning is tied to their goals in the here and now and their interests. So it's highly engaged services, and that's super important. So the basic skills at ESL, they're taught in really a seamless fashion that supports their learning. And then the learning is very deliberately contextualized to the area of study. It's a lot easier to use kind of contextualized math related to what they were having to measure when they're on a construction site, or even fluids if they're in a health careers occupation. But using measurement that is specific to that work skill that they're going to need is very engaging and supports students' learning. Students are motivated. Y'all caught that one immediately for sure. And with successful basic skills instruction, students move further, faster. And I think that's one of the reasons why we picture it this way, and we picture these things being done simultaneously. The law actually uses the word concurrent, simultaneous delivery. So doing an IET sequentially, such as, we're going to get everybody and get their measurable skills gain and get their high school equivalency, and then we're going to put them in training and we'll talk to them once a week. That's not an IET. That's providing some good support for somebody who's gone on to training, but it's not an IET. So this year we're really looking at that intensity, because that intensity also means that you're working with individuals who need the support. If somebody doesn't need adult education and literacy activities, we don't need to be involved in that service. So if they don't need it, we don't need to be there delivering it. Move them on, help them on into post-secondary with financial aid, maybe a little dev ed if they need it through, a co-requisite possibly, but you don't need to spend your time and energy to do an integrated education and training with someone who doesn't need or want to be there. So if they don't want to be there, that's often an indication they're not getting what they need in their basic skills. So that's a lot about why it works. And then how do you know specifically that it's working? I mean, what is telling you that it's working, that you can look at that's concrete instead of all of this, qualitative measure? Well, you're looking at they're making gains. Are they passing the tests that they may be taking along the road to their HVAC certification or to their certified nursing assistant state exam? Are they persisting and coming to class? Are they passing the credentialing exam? We allow you to pay for the credentialing exam. So that's really important that you help to prep them with the reading skills, the being able to deconstruct Q&As, et cetera, and help them with those basic skills that will help them pass the credentialing exams. So that's some of how it works. They go on to further education. They want to continue, or they go right away and get a job and start working. So those are the kinds of outcomes that we want. And that's the way you all are telling us too that it's working. When we look at the data and we see that nobody in those IETs had any kind of measurable skills gain, we're wondering what the intensity of those services are. So here's, a little bit of updated research, and these, I'm not sure if they're yet on our website, but the Tipping Point survey really did, push this up into the federal landscape and enable us to do these models. But there has been now a lot of new research, and it's great to see it. I know that we're going to learn a lot as we start to, talk more about these evidence-based practices. So here's a survey in 2018, one in 2017. It's great to see the more recent survey. And I'm trying to update our website, as I said, make sure that you get just links to some interesting research, in integrated education and training models. So I want to talk then about AEL activities for ELLs. And I think I'm doing pretty good on time. I'm actually moving along pretty well. So let's see. So your AEL activities for English language learners, we do call this model the integrated education and training, integrated EL civics with training is integrated EL civics is what it's called. So the integrated EL civics is really the model that you should be using with your English language learners. We have changed something in the upcoming year, so you're not going to have to worry so much about where you're taking those funds from. We will be able to identify that because you're going to continue to identify in teams that you're doing an integrated EL civics. You just won't have that extra burden on, figuring out the money behind the curtain. So, but those activities, that being said, English language learners do have unique needs. I mean, I know that those of you who live in communities where you're working with a lot of second language learners, the unique needs really do need to be addressed, whether it's oral language or whether it's writing, so that their communication in English supports their progress in employment and progress at their job sites. So supporting English language learners is super important. And the law calls out English language learners specifically, and it includes professionals with degrees and credentials in their native country. That's actually in WIOA. It's not exclusive that you need to find individuals who are skilled in order to put them in an integrated education and training program for a second language learner, but it is an option. So second language learners may come into your programs with maybe only a 6th grade education in their home country, but they have a drive, they want to get to work, they have, you've spent time exploring careers, you're looking at the kind of career program you might do for second language learners, which it can be exactly the same kind of programs that you're doing for anyone else. It just needs to have the unique constructs that support language learning. So that's one of the differences for your ELLs. We want to make sure that you're providing those and following the standards. We have ESL content standards, and we now have civics education standards. So civics education and your ESL standards need to both be reflected when you're doing your integrated education and training for English language learners. So this is another, I just want to show you this also, and you might see the term, and you'll see it on our website also on some of the documents, particularly the ones that are produced federally, because they reference what we call integrated EL civics. They use the term IELCE. So when you see that, you can see that IELCE with training is really what we call integrated EL civics. So we've taken from the back end from you having to worry about the finance on it, but we do want to continue to see that you are doing a program that meets the kinds of requirements. So one of the other differences, which is spelled out a little bit more explicitly for our integrated EL civics programs, is that while all of your integrated education and training programs need to be integrated with your local workforce development area needs and in-demand occupations, areas that individuals will be able to find work if you're going to spend money training them. Well, for EL Civics, they've added the language that it needs to be designed to prepare adult English language learners and place them in unsubsidized employment in demand industries. And it needs to integrate with board and workforce solution office functions to carry out the activities of the program. Now, we haven't looked real deeply at this over the last few years, but we do want to provide you with more support and hear from you in ways that we can provide the kind of support you need to do these kinds of activities more formally. Your boards are also required to serve those that are English language learners. So this is a real opportunity that you may have opportunity for discussion with your board. What is the process now that they're doing for identifying the needs of English language learners, and what tools are they using to determine whether that individual is ready for training? You might have a role there to work with them, and what kinds of resources you can bring to collaborate to do an English, an integrated EL civics with your board. So let's talk a little bit about how do you build it. These obviously, we've got our 3 components here. When you speak to someone at the policy level about the importance of career pathways and access to career pathways for lower skilled students, there's this theoretical framework that serves to support the model. These are 6 key elements of a career pathway system that support us from the state level. And this is kind of the federal design. But I think as we've talked to people and looked at how they are structuring and the kind of infrastructure they need at the local level, all of these things are applicable. I mean, I think people would agree. Would you say you've got to do partnerships? You've got to have some kind of partnership with a training provider. Engaging employers is fabulous because you can connect individuals to specific jobs afterwards. You've got to design programs collaborating both with education and training. You've got to find a way to fund it. You've got to align your system policies. Maybe your workforce training department won't allow anybody into training who doesn't have a high school diploma. Maybe they make people with high school equivalencies take a test and see what level they're reading at. What can you do to help the partners that you're working with find flexibilities in what they're doing to help you serve those that are in need and that are ready and want to get into those training? So a lot of system alignment, I think, is also happening. Actually, I didn't want to skip measure performance at all. These are, so when you're looking at all of the components, these really say it all to me. You have to do all of these things to do an effective integration education and training program. You may not talk about them a lot. We don't have you report a lot to us about it, but we know that effective programs and that are long, ongoing and continue in your communities are probably ones that have worked through a lot of these conversations. So let's talk a little bit about the internal team. You've got your director, your career navigator, and I haven't done enough shout outs to those career navigators because we all know we deeply appreciate the work that they do. You've got your enrollment and your recruitment, your instructional team, performance and quality assurance. So that's really your internal team. So who's on your stakeholder team? Who's outside the organization and working with you internally? So you've got your internal partners, you've got external partners. Maybe it's your organization, but you have to find a way to work with the academic department, or you have to find a way to work with your career and technical ed side. You have to work with the workforce system, employers, your workforce boards, workforce solutions staff. You want to be able to get referrals. So you have a stakeholder team that's by far a community-based team. You've got pipelines, establishing pipelines for referrals. And then we want you to work with our professional development system, our office, so that we can really help you meet the goals of an IET. And ultimately, that's basic skills and credential attainment. It's connecting with employers and getting jobs in the community, getting people employed, and also helping people find further training after they get to work and building that pathway. So from a design perspective, what are the potential benefits? And I am getting close to the end here. Potential benefits. I mean, what are the kinds of things as you guys are doing these? What ways are you finding from a design perspective you're seeing benefit? I know they're probably you probably don't talk about them a lot, I'm going to put a few up here. Maybe you've been able to streamline some services between yourself and your CE department. Maybe you have some good pipelines with one of your credit divisions that you're doing, maybe IT, and you've got referrals from your academic partners for people who still need more basic skills, but maybe have been working in the IT industry. So lots of ways to get connected when you get in these system discussions with local level for other collaborations. Hopefully you're reducing redundant activities and overall increasing student supports. And possibly you have some ideas about potential challenges from a design perspective. I worked in this area a lot, did a lot of development of IETs, and I know there are challenges. Today I really have hoped to kind of build the big picture and kind of refresh yourself on these models and let you know that it is a good time to step back and really evaluate, what you've done, what your successes have been by your outcomes and your performance, and look at how you can go continue to move forward. Perhaps a rhetorical question about the potential challenges, but if anybody wants to put anything in the chat pod, I'd be glad to see it. I'll put up a few things that I could think of. Often it's a challenge to define the basic skills needed for the training. If you're working with a CE division, sometimes they just, anybody who comes in the door and pays gets in. Sometimes the CE division will say, no, you got to take my TABE test and you got to read at a 10th grade level. Who knows what it may be? Maybe they say you have to TSI. There's lots of ways that, that can be very locally specific. Scheduling a unique start date. You working with a training provider, are you doing a cohort approach, which is recommended as a best practice? It's good to have a group of people that can share the experience of going through that opportunity. And then providers and participants, having to be in the pipeline, kind of waiting to get started. So Denise gave me one here. Good. Being open to any career cluster can be a blessing and a curse. True. Difficult to contextualize everything. Yes. So there are challenges. Thank you, Denise. There are definitely challenges. And we're trying to learn more about the challenges that you face, because those challenges, what can we bring from the state perspective to help you solve those challenges? So don't ever hesitate to share the challenges with us at our office, with program specialists, with your PD specialist, because we want to ensure that people that need services can get the services and that we can support you in helping to break down any barriers that may exist. Here's Mario's employer. I'm going to just give you a quick look at this fulfillment center and see if you have any ideas about. He works for a fulfillment center, needs new employees. They aren't able to submit the application. Low digital literacy skills. They get a lot of submissions that say incomplete. Local community college offers a forklift training, a logistics pathway, a short occupational skills certificate. Courses can be done a day or night. So I really put this in there because, that employer, as you build a network and as you meet with stakeholders, these opportunities may surface that may lead you to a need that you can help solve in your community. So what might we need to do for Mario? He works at this fulfillment center. Is he a good fit for one of your programs? I think right up at the top of the program, somebody said, yeah, let's look at getting him in a high school equivalency and a career pathway. There's lots of opportunities to find ways to support individuals in our individual integrated education and training pathways. How you do it is pretty much a local decision within the constraints of 3 core components in our definition of an integrated education and training. Helping a lower skilled student. How can we help a lower skilled student? Select all that apply. And, I'm missing that slide. Well, can anybody kind of help me out there? Let's see. Helping lower skilled students, somebody who may not meet the educational requirements to get into the welding program that is set already? What are some options for your program? And I'm going to take you kind of back to the term somebody asked about yesterday, a bridge program. Sorry that all those items do not appear here, but a bridge program is a good opportunity to do both more comprehensive assessment with the student to find out what they're really interested in, ready for, and the kind of support that that individual will need. So you have a lot of tools in your toolbox to get you to IETs, and building processes that work together is one of the best practices we've seen across the state. And we know that the academy model itself was really designed to give you that opportunity to bring people together, maybe under a healthcare academy. Let people come into the academy and think, oh yeah, I've always wanted to be a nurse. And as they learn, just kind of, it's like the studying language related to health careers, learning about health careers. That is not an IET, but learning about health careers is a great activity. It helps their basic skills development, et cetera, and also can help themselves better refine their pathway. So you have a lot of ways you can structure and design your programs. We are here to help integrated education and training. In many ways, students go further, faster, but I want to say, and I heard Judy Mortude say this, so I thank her for this, that, we often talk about this being accelerated. It's an accelerated pathway. We even call our flagship IET Accelerate Texas. But we know when you build a program for somebody who has low basic skills, that welding class or that CNA class or that business management course may need to be expanded. Maybe the college offers it's 2 months, but when you're doing it along with basic skills, it may be 3 months. So we call it farther, faster. We say it's accelerated. And it is for an individual because it gets them out of a sequence. You have to learn English before you can do this. And then you have to get your high school equivalency before you can do this. So I want you all to come out of this thinking, well, maybe that simultaneous approach of basic skills, English language learning, high school equivalency, it's that prime place for all of that can sit under an integrated education and training program for English language learners or for basics, those who are in basic skills needs. So I'm pretty much at the end. I didn't stop and take any questions along the way. I know this has really been pretty big picture. I'm just going to show you a quick series of how it might look. We talk about simultaneous, concurrent basic skills. So we're trying to find better ways to present this. But an individual might take this sequence of courses, at the same time receiving enough basic skills that they can pass. There's a series of EPA certifications an individual might be able to take, but they're difficult also to take. So reading and writing, these are, you want to be able to support that individual to attain the credential. So maybe you start with an on-ramp and something, about the trades. Are you interested in HVAC? Do you want to be a construction engineer? Do you want to, do drafting, whatever? The kinds of career college knowledge exploration is contextualized learning for basic skills. So you're just contextualizing for career exploration. Y'all have been doing that for many years. So that's a great way to do basic skills and find out more about your learner. Do it it helps you, really plan out that comprehensive approach to what students need. And then you can find those that fit and move into this program. I'm just going to show you two, they may get out, you may stop working with them after they've gotten their OSA, but they could go on and do more programs. I'm not sure I sent this out in the email, but I'll send it out through Olga. There's a great thing that class put out, kind of looking at programs and how they've itemized out their IETs. And this is one that, thanks to Kim Vinton, she put together on a special program that they did in collaboration with their consortium and Jobs for Future. So they accessed additional funding through Jobs for the Future to kind of help really plan this one out. That's an opportunity you have too. I mean, in terms of looking at who your partners are and how you work in your community. And then just one more slide here. I do want to say we've given more resources and money to IETs. We are giving less than we did previous 4 years. That's partially because the cost being reported in Cedar did not justify the amount we were allocating. So we cut it back. We've really been focusing on helping you all to report those IET costs accurately in Cedar. And I think Lori and Kara and I did a workshop on that. I think it's probably worth a refresher, possibly if you think you might be interested in that, let us know, because we know these are expensive programs to run. They're expensive programs to build. You need staff, you need full-time staff that can support these activities. So we want to ensure that you have the resources from us to provide these services. And I'm not sure what the allocation will be for this upcoming year, but this year you essentially were cut in half. I guess during the pandemic, we've had, that probably did not have as much of an impact as it could have had. But keep that in mind that, you definitely want to use the resources that are allocated for the activities. And that's it. This is just required reporting. You do have to do the implementation plan. Students need an ITech plan, and teams, you have to set up a training service, use appropriate funding codes, validate your classes, report outcomes, etc. Questions? So I'm a little bit over. I apologize. But that's it. Any questions anybody wants to ask now? I'll be, Deb is going to go next and do digital literacy, distance education. I apologize. It's going to talk about distance education models. And then I'll come back and do intensive services. We'll do a Reader's Digest version of intensive services. This is really to give you kind of the big picture overview. I hope it was helpful.
So Deborah, if you'd like to get started, we're going to have Deborah, Lori Slayton, Dr. Deborah Hargrove, and Ashley Winkle provide an overview of distance learning in Texas. So welcome.
Thank you, Olga. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be here with you on this hot, muggy, humid day. We're going to take some time this morning to talk to you a little bit about distance learning, just a brief overview. And looking at the names on this list, I know there are some folks here who could be really considered a distance learning guru. So I appreciate you being here, and please pipe in at any time with any best practices or anything that you may have found as we continue forward. The first thing I want to just go over are the objectives of this particular training. We're going to identify the definition of distance learning in Texas, identify how it is tracked, look briefly at a distance learning report in teams, and we're going to talk about the audience, the model, the criteria for awarding proxy hours. I'm looking at the distance learning curriculum, and then identifying the difference between distance learning and remote instruction. And those, of course, are new, remote instruction being new to us in depth because of the pandemic last year and as we continue forward. So as you may or may not know, the definition for distance learning for Texas is the one that we use from the National Reporting System. Basically, distance education is formal learning where students and instructors are separated by geography, time, or both for the majority of the instructional period. So as we move forward, we're going to talk about how distance learning and distance education is delivered. And it can be delivered through print, audio recordings. We're doing a lot of broadcasting with our Zoom accounts and WebEx, or some online learning like the learning you guys go through with the PD portal. So we have a distance learning policy. I'm going to bring it up here. Olga, can you see that webpage?
Yes, ma'am.
So how you can get to the distance learning policy is through the TCAL website. And if you go all the way over to institutes, there's a drop down. And I've just basically clicked on the Distance Learning and Technology Integration webpage on the TCAL website. And again, TCAL is basically tcal.tamu.edu, and it'll bring you up to this page. So you can go to the Institute for Distance Learning and Tech Integration. And the way we have this laid out is all of the required items, or the first items that you see, the distance learning requirements. So we do have a policy. I'm going to talk about that. And we also have a link to the curriculum, as well as some other links you'll hear us talk about as we move forward. Here's the policy. And there's a few sections that we want to mention in relationship to the participants and how we track them. And there are, two ways that we track students who were enrolled in distance learning. That's through proxy hours and through direct contact hours. Now, proxy hours are where the identity of the participant or the exact amount of time spent on an activity can't always be verified. They're tied only to a approved distance learning curriculum. So the only way a student can get time for proxy hours is if they're working independently on a distance learning curriculum. It's where the identity of the student and the exact amount of time spent on an activity cannot always be verified. We also have direct contact hours. So we have proxy contact hours different from direct hours in that the identity of the participant and the exact amount of time spent on an activity can be counted. So we have interaction in real time, we have face-to-face contact, and we have contact through phone where you can hear the student's voice, video and teleconference where you can see the student, and other online communication that can verify the student's identity. And we've been using this a lot, and we'll talk about this later when Ashley talks about remote instruction, where we have live online discussions, telephone conference calls, or live video broadcasts. Now, when we talk about distance learning and proxy hours, we have to remember that there is a 12-hour rule in the distance learning policy. Just as with face-to-face classes, a student must obtain at least 12 direct contact hours to be considered our participant in adult education. So you can have a student, and many of you may have done this last year, who began their program strictly with distance learning, but at some point you had to have 12 direct contact hours with that student in order to be able to count them for the program year. If you had someone last year that only did distance learning through an approved curriculum and they got a ton of proxy hours, you are not able to count them until you can prove that you had 12 direct contact hours with that student. This is an important aspect of the policy, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that and understands that. Are there any questions about that?
Deborah, we had a comment from Ethan. It says period of participation applies to DL students also, correct?
Yes, that's correct. They have to have, the 12 direct contact hours also.
Okay, I don't see anything else coming through yet.
Okay, great. So let's take a look at the approved distance learning curriculum. Over the years, I've been here 7 years, and over the last 7 years, our distance learning curriculum has grown exponentially. What I like about what TWC does here is they gives the local programs the opportunity to identify what curriculum would be most beneficial to their students. You know, there are some states, in my experience, that only have 1 or 2 approved curriculum for their students. And when you have such a large state, you're going to have a diverse group of students. And in that is going to be diverse learning needs. And so what's nice about Texas is we have a list of so many different approved curriculum that can meet any student's needs. I can't imagine you not being able to find a curriculum that doesn't meet what your students are looking for. So if you haven't been to the list in a while, let me just give you just a very quick overview. You'll see that there are 6 different columns. It's the title along with the publisher, the audience, which is who is this curriculum focused on? Is it ABE students, lower level students, or is it GED, high school equivalency? Or we have a very large, in fact, our largest population is ESL. I'm going to talk here in just a minute about the different ways of tracking of the clock time model or the mastery model or the time on task teacher certification model. That's the 3rd column. The 4th column is how the criteria is awarded, the criteria for awarding the hours to your students. And you'll see that this is based on the model of the curriculum. So for example, Aztec here has a number of different approved curriculum. It's all tracked by the time on task. So you go to that software and it will tell you how many hours, how much, how many minutes the student has used or taken in that particular curriculum. And then it'll tell you who that is validated by, the software developer. So Aztec says, yes, we have a system in the back end of this software that tracks the time on task that a student has spent in a curriculum. The majority of these programs, if not all of them, I can't say for sure, but I suspect, have a built-in period of inactivity. You know what I mean? So if a student has not done anything for, say, 15 minutes, it'll time out and it'll take the student out. So you wonder, can a student just log in and then go do something else for half an hour or an hour and get the credit as a proxy hour? No. The majority of these software programs that I've spoken to the vendors, they have a period of inactivity that it'll kick the student out.
Now, Deborah,
The final column is just any contact information, a website link, or the name of the representative. So, if you're going through here and looking for the contact, if they're not listed here, let us know and we'll give you the current contact. We used to have all the contact names on here, but frankly, some of them leave a lot, they have a lot of turnover. So we're not really putting the contact names, but we have a list of them. So let me know if you ever need a contact name and we can give it to you. Oh, anytime a publisher wants to be considered for being an approved distance learning curriculum provider, all they do now is they go to a survey that TWC has developed and they have to answer all the questions in this survey. There's a lot of them and it's important for them to answer them because we want to be able to tell the feds that yes, we are using trackable, meaningful content for distance learning for our students. And so it has to be attached to like some standards, some of our for ESL or ABE or GED or other content standards. And so we've got this survey. And then if you also have where you currently have a set of distance learning software, but you want to add a new software provider, you don't have to fill out the whole policy DL plan again. You can actually just go right here to the distance learning plan addendum. So you just click on the addendum and add the new curriculum that you would like to use. And once you complete this, then you just send that in to TWC, Lori, or do they just need to keep a copy of it on site when they do the addendum?
They just need to keep a copy of it in case we do request them
Or if they get monitored?
or if they get monitored.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. There is a double dipping rule. So one of the big concepts for awarding hours in distance learning is there's no double dipping. And what that means is you can't give a student direct hours and then give them proxy hours for the same activity. So for example, like if you're using Rosetta Stone in your computer lab during class time, you're all in there together, you're all going through Rosetta Stone. You can award the student proxy hours. You can award your student proxy hours and direct contact hours for that same time. That's called double dipping. In this scenario, of a teacher guided lab time, that would be in class regular hours. Let me let that sink in for a second. If you have a lab and you've got your students in the classroom and you take your students to the lab and you all sign in and you're helping them and you're talking and spending time with them, helping them with Rosetta Stone, you're all going through it, that's direct contact hours. If you have an open lab and your students want to stay on campus and work on their distance learning, you can, they're done with their in-class learning. They can go on their own to the open lab without any instructions by you and sign into their distance learning software and work. And that's considered proxy out, right? But they really don't like you to do that because that can slowly get you into trouble if you can't find that defining separation of line between direct hours and proxy hours. So it's a hard concept. If you want to bring them into the lab and teach them, that's fine. Just remember that would be direct contact hours. But really, if we're together in a lab, there's no distance learning going on anyway. Now, information can't be retaught from the distance learning curriculum exactly as it is. I mean, you can't give the students the answers or go screen by screen or page by page over the material in the distance learning curriculum. What you can do to help students master the skill, if they've got some difficulties in that curriculum, is provide some other resources or different explanations or other strategies. An instructor can't use the same problem to teach adding fractions, but they can go over how to teach fractions and use other resources to reinforce that skill. Does that make sense? Some products like Burlington English are designed to have additional practice that corresponds with their independent study component. That's not really considered reteaching. The additional resources are just extra activities to help the students learn and apply the content. So the big idea is to make sure that proxy hours awarded for distance learning are not also awarded for the same exact content when the student is signed in. Now, some of the curriculum may have resources or activities that you want to use for another purpose. For example, you might like USA Learns video on the job hunt or something, and you want to include that in your career awareness lesson, and that's fine, provided you're not going over the exact actual instructional content from USA Learns Course 2 and counting that same as proxy hours for your students when they complete it as their own. So, the big idea is just to make sure that proxy hours awarded for distance learning are not also awarded for the same exact content reviewed when the student is in your class. Let's look at some examples. And I have to tell you that we've redone these examples like 3 times because we made them really hard the first time and realized it's really hard to do these when you're presenting this online. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read the scenario, and then in a real life situation, if we were doing this face-to-face, you would have a copy of the approved curriculum matrix, right, of all the different curriculum. So this example is going to be USA Learns. So I'm going to scroll down here to USA Learns, and I'm going to just give a brief overview. USA Learns Part 1 contains 20 individual units, and a student will receive 3 proxy hours for each unit as long as they pass with a 70% proficiency. Thank you, Olga. She put the link into the chat pod if you have 2 screens. So just remember that. You get 3 proxy hours for each unit completed in USA Learns Part 1. So let's go back to the scenario. New student Maria completes the Best Literacy Placement Test. She's in the testing center for 2 hours. Based on her score, she's assigned to USA Learns First English Course Part 1. And she finishes Units 1 and 2 in Part 1 and receives a score of 75%. If we remember, you have to have a 70, so she passed. She also participates in an online chat with her distance learning teacher for 30 minutes about a homework assignment. How many proxy hours and how many direct hours should she receive? How many proxy hours, right, She's working on units 1 and 2 in USA Learns. How many proxy hours does she get for each unit?
Deborah,
Yes.
Jennifer and Griselda are saying 6 proxy
Yep.
hours.
Yep. She's awarded 6 proxy hours because she completed units 1 and 2 at 3 hours each with a passing score of 75. Good.
Okay, so there's others saying 6 proxy, 0.5 direct.
That is correct. Why is it only 0.5 direct when she went and did her testing? Because testing doesn't count. That's great. Now, Sandra, 6, but she doesn't have 12 hours face-to-face. No, when you do the testing center, that doesn't count. You don't get time for testing. So her face-to-face would only be half an hour that her teacher online. You don't get time for initial testing. Okay, let's try, and this is, I forgot we put the explanation in here. See, she only gets 5.5 because she does not get hours for initial testing, but does get direct hours for the time spent speaking with her teacher. Okay, let's try another one. Here's Anthony. Anthony completed 1 lesson in English Discoveries. The system reports shows that he spent 2 hours on the lesson, but he's still confused on some of the sections of the lesson. He set up a 1-hour face-to-face meeting with his teacher to go over the lesson. She went through the curriculum with him, exercise by exercise, so that he could see how to do the problems correctly. Anthony also attended a 1-hour face-to-face session with his distance learning teacher to reevaluate the short-term goals he had set for himself. So how many proxy hours and how many direct contact hours should Anthony receive?
Okay, Deborah, while we're waiting, I think there was a question from Claire that said, so testing time counts after 12 hours. I think this was for the previous one. And then Ashley said no. And then Lori said, yes, only the test that determine eligibility for the program does not count. So
Right. That was the confusion we had yesterday.
Well,
We're
just,
not
I'm
sure why
sorry,
they would take it. I'm sorry.
I know I'm giving you guys feedback. I think there's a little bit of confusion about the 12 hours because they're thinking that like proxy hours don't count until they have the 12 hours. But Lori explained that the 12 hours can come throughout the year, but it won't count if they don't get the 12 hours face to face.
does that answer the question, Claire? Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. So
All
let's
right,
see.
so
Jody,
we're still waiting for about Anthony, right? Nothing
I
from-
got Jody says proxy is 2 hours and direct is 1 hour. Does everybody agree? Yep. And that's correct. Way to go, Jody. Because the teacher went through the whole lesson with Anthony, that's 1 hour. But he already did the lesson and he would get 2 proxy hours for doing the lesson. And if I had to choose, I'd give Anthony the 2 proxy hours instead of the 1 hour I took to do the reteaching. So he's got 2 proxy hours and then he's got 1 direct hour. Okay, good job, good job. The first day of the Adult Ed program, John completes a baseline test, which takes 1 hour to complete. The second day, he attends 1.5 hour orientation and spends another 2 hours completing the TABE. During the week, John completes several reading skills modules on Aztec, and the time on task report details that he was actively engaged for 3 hours. John also attends the face-to-face class meets for 2 hours each night. During class, the teacher provides direct instruction on several of the reading strategies presented in the online Aztec module. It's a long one. How many proxy? How many direct? Lorraine, Tara, 4 direct hours if the student chooses outside class when log into the DL module, and 3 hours proxy. Lorraine, 3 hours proxy, 4 hours direct. So let's go through it. He got 3 hours for direct instruction. He already completed that baseline test. So the second one, this is a trick question. He completed the baseline test, which took him an hour. So that doesn't count. The second day, he attends 1.5 hours of orientation and 2 hours completing the TABE test. Plus he had 2 face-to-face sessions for 2 hours each night. So he has 1.5 hours orientation, 2 hours pre-test, 2 hour face-to-faces. He gets 7.5 direct hours and 3 hours of proxy. You want me to go back? I feel like we're probably set for time.
Adrian says orientation counts towards direct hours.
The first day he completes the test, takes the second day he attends the orientation and spends 2 hours completing TABE. It's my understanding orientation counted. Didn't that change, Lori?
This says, but orientation doesn't count as direct, says Tara. And Lorraine says, wait, I thought you couldn't count orientation.
That's why I'm
to-"
asking Lori. Yeah.
And then Jennifer says tape testing counts. They're all asking. They're all
Yeah,
confused
yeah,
now.
I see it now.
Sorry, I was muted and talked away. So once they have completed their baseline to determine eligibility, your time starts counting then. So he will get 1.5 hours for orientation and 2 hours for completing the TABE because he already took his initial baseline test and was enrolled. Yeah, Anna, it totally depends on when you're doing your orientation. This one in this scenario would count because it's already been baseline.
So maybe what we need to do is do some clarification in an email, Lori, just to kind of reinforce that had changed. Yeah, that's what I'm asking, Gracie, is we might need to.
I don't know that that's a change, Deborah. It's been that way.
Well, I thought at one time that orientation didn't count.
If you're doing orientation before you're baselining them and determining eligibility, then it doesn't count.
Oh,
If you're doing it once this person has been enrolled in baseline, then everything counts after that.
okay. Everybody get that?
So it totally depends on when you're doing
The baseline test.
orientation.
Right.
Is this
Okay.
is this strictly for DL?
No.
So Lorraine's asking, is it better to give the baseline test first? I guess it would.
Well, we're not going to make that determination for you, but if they've been baselined and enrolled, all of their time will count. If you're doing orientation first to determine whether this student is a good fit for your program and then baselining them, then orientation would not count.
And the question,
So in this particular scenario, the 2 hours completing the TABE pretest is after he's already been baselined. I don't
with
know.
a different test. Yeah.
I don't know why they would be setting it up this way, but the 2 hours completing the TABE would count because he's already been baselined and enrolled. So testing counts for direct time once they've been enrolled in baseline. So what does a baseline mean exactly? That means you baseline them to determine if they're eligible for your program, if they're basic skills deficient based on their score, that's your baseline. That's how you determine whether they're eligible for your program.
So I think the question is, what's the difference between baseline and TABE? I think that depends on who the student is. You know, the baseline test, if it's an ESL student, could be something else, but then you realize that, you know, they could be in some ABE classes. And so you've got to test them with a different test. I
And-
think that's the difference. The way
Yeah,
I understand it. Is
I
that
think we
correct?
need to reword this a little bit because
Okay.
the testing is what's throwing them off.
Yeah.
And Tara says the question doesn't say his eligibility has been determined. That's what your baseline is. You're determining whether they're basic skills deficient and eligible for our program. And yes, Gracie, it says he completed the TABE on the second day. So how would that count? Because he's already been baselined and enrolled. So any post-testing or pre-testing on another instrument would count. Once he's been baselined and enrolled in the program, it all counts. Okay, Paul, wait. So this assumes the baseline test is not a TABE test in this scenario. That's correct, Adam.
So this is from what I put in the chat pod is from the the TWC.
And yes, Paul, just need one TABE test to determine,
That's the wrong one.
and the other two sections to occur within 5 days of the first 12 hours of attendance. And Jacqueline, we didn't say what the baseline was. I think we need to just reword this
Okay.
because it's really.
All
throwing
right.
people
No,
off.
I don't want people to get frustrated. All right, you guys, we'll reword this one or just take it out. I don't want to confuse everybody. We were doing really good there for a bit. To the power.
And let me answer Paul's question real quick. Best Plus progress testing, student has 52 hours of proxy and 10 of face-to-face. You can progress test them before they hit that 12 hours, but none of it's going to count if you don't get the 12 hours before the end of the program year. And if you are doing orientation after you're baselining and enrolling your students, then it counts.
Okay, let's move on. So, you know, when we talk about double dipping, you know, one of the examples that I skipped over was was a student going to class and the lab, and the teacher walked them there, and but then she left, and just trying to remember what double dipping is, because the idea of distance learning is that the teacher and the student are separated by time, geography, or both. Now, let's talk about the distance learning models. These were the models I spoke about in the very beginning under the DL policy. So this is the way that we track distance learning. And the curriculum that is provided by our publishers will either be tracked by the clock time model, which is, as you know, just time on task. The teacher certification model, which assigns a fixed number of hours for each lesson or unit a student completes based on the instructor's evaluation. Or the learner mastery model, which assigns hours based on a passing score on a content test, or a passing rate with a minimum of like 70%, unless recommended differently during the curriculum approval process. So we've got 3 different ways of tracking. And the way that we track it is by putting things into teams. So we track it in teams, which is our own little system here in Texas. It stands for Texas Education Adults Management System. It's what we use to enter distance learning. And then the way that we enter this is how it's reported to the feds. We do have a DL and Teams online course in the PD portal. I mean, we encourage any of you to take that. I think it's just a 1-hour course. It's listed in the portal, I think, as DL Academy 4. We have to be accountable to Octave for our documenting of students. And, since there's more than one way to learn these days, we should be able to count that they're doing stuff on their own using distance learning curriculum when they're away from our program. Accountability is important. If we are not accountable, there are ways that TWC can document that through a technical assistance plan, which some of us have been on, a corrective action plan. We could not get any additional funds for distance learning or any other program if we're not reporting our numbers correctly. They could take part of our allotment away, or they could basically just defund our programs. If your adult ed program isn't operating correctly and
She
you're
wouldn't tell them that.
what?
I'm sorry, I was talking to somebody else.
If what defund
Sorry.
program, that happens though, doesn't it? So we got to be careful.
There are possibilities, but we've never defunded anyone at this point.
All right, let's look at distance learning curriculum. I know we've already done that. You can find the list on the website. The survey is there. Programs can purchase from more than one vendor. In fact, I think some of you might still have some additional COVID money that you have. Start looking at these different vendors. Go to your DL lead. In our monthly DL leads webinars, we have and showcase one of our distance learning providers. And so they're getting an opportunity to review a new provider each month as we go through. Here is one of the reports that is used in distance learning. John Stevenson coined this the none, some, and mostly report, because this identifies users with no distance learning, users with less than 50% of their coursework is distance learning, and then the majority of students who have more than 50% of their coursework, their hours, their participation in adult ed, more than 50% of that is proxy hour. And it's an interesting report. I encourage you all to look at it and just see how the different functioning levels are documented and how they're used. You'll see that in some years, the hybrid approach to learning has become the most effective and provided the most participation and the most people completing levels. So I encourage you to take a look at that, the none, some, and mostly report. Again, here are the different academies that we have. The nuts and bolts is online in the portal now. The choosing DL curriculum, we haven't done that one in a few years, but if you do need help with choosing curriculum, reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to help you. DL3 is that 10-hour curriculum that's in the portal if you're new and doing a DL plan. We're trying to find some time to get that taken into smaller units So just be patient with that. But if you have somebody new in distance learning, you can take them through that course. DL4 is that DL and Teams course I was talking to you about. And we're tweaking, this is our piloting of this course that we're showing you today. So we're tweaking it as we go, and it's going to be DL5, just an overview of distance learning. So with that being said, in about 10 minutes left for poor Ashley to talk about remote, I'm going to turn it over to her and let her do a little talking on remote, hybrid, and blended learning.
Okay, the good news is it's quick. And a lot of us are pretty familiar with some of this now. So we're going to just kind of go through some definitions. It is kind of confusing for some of them. Some of these we've gotten to know quite well, I think. But basically, for remote learning is formal learning activity that involves a group of students engaging with an instructor at the same time, which, as we know, I'm pretty sure by now that this is our direct learning. This is often referred to as synchronous learning. It's usually, as we all know probably too well now versus a year ago, web conferencing tools such as video conferencing, live chat, webinars, that sort of thing are usually utilized. Instructors and students, basically, they're going to communicate in real time versus hybrid learning. So Texas, I'm going to point out, is different. I attend a lot of, different conferences and sessions across the country, and we're different from everybody else. So we've tried to kind of put together our definition as we use it here. So hybrid learning is basically programs that offer a period of in-class instruction with the option of also participating in online learning. So your program will offer online instruction through a distance learning curriculum of some type, in addition to your normal in-class instruction, which would either be your face-to-face or remote. I know when I was at ELCOT, the way we did it is if they were going to be in a face-to-face class, they had the option of also doing online curriculum like Aztec or something like that. So participants can attend both face-to-face and remote classes in addition to distance learning. And then blended learning. So it gets a little bit confusing, I think, between the two, between what is blended learning, what is hybrid learning. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think World Ed thinks of them as the same thing. We do not. We look at this a little bit differently. Blended learning is basically a tight integration of instruction delivered online and in class. So it combines in-class learning with online instruction as part of a collective whole. So in other words, the program would require both because they work together. I honestly love the idea of it. I don't know a lot of people who are doing it yet, but I think I see it coming in the future. The instructor is basically what they're doing is they're making adjustments to their in-class teaching based on what they're seeing done online. So they're watching and they're assessing, formative assessment online, and whatever they see the need is the most, they're going to turn around and they're going to, focus that on their face-to-face teaching. And then on the reverse side of that, make adjustments to online assessments based on their in-class observations. So they're basically blending the two together, which is probably I think Lori may have mentioned that too. It's probably where you see the most success with students. Research has proven that this is the best model that there is. And I noticed last year when I did just a little, I just went through the data myself in my program, and I noticed that my students in the one class that I based it on, all the students that were, well, I called them hybrid students, but the ones that were doing both, every single one of them had an MSG versus the others, not so much. And that was just a small little test of my own, but I have read a lot of research on it that this is the best model. It's probably the most difficult, I think, to implement, in my opinion anyway, unless somebody comes up with something easier with what we do. But that is basically the difference between hybrid and blended learning. And I'm just going to stop for a second and see if that it makes sense or if anybody needs clarification on that, because that does sometimes get confusing. And then I was just reading in the chat, Lori said data indicates that a hybrid of face-to-face and proxy hours results. Okay, yeah, that you were saying what I was saying too. And then Anna said, I think she asked a question, at the state level, do you have what you'd like a student population to look like for percentage of DL or proxy hours reported? That I would have to let somebody else answer that question. But is everybody else, does that make sense between the blended and hybrid, the difference? Well, nobody's talking to me, so I'm going to assume it's
Ashley,
okay. Yes.
Ashley, I think that Lori was responding to Anna's question with that statement. It's just saying that those individuals that
gotcha.
are doing DL have a higher level of gains. So not a exact number. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, basically, we just kind of put this matrix together to kind of show, the difference between the 4 types. This is probably more important now than it has been ever before, because I'm seeing a lot of programs really start to look into the idea of hybrid and blending learning and using that curriculum that we have, to kind of complement what we're doing in class as well. And if there are any other questions, just let me know.
I was just going to say, Anna, what might have also been, the way I read that was, are there any targets? I don't think the TBC has put any targets on what percentage they want as far as DL, but the more hybrid students you can get in the program, research shows the more completions you'll get.
Yeah, there's not a target for DL, if was the question.
So Adrienne, the main difference that blended has required, so this is for you, Ashley.
Yes, sorry. The main difference is blended learning has required face-to-face and DL versus hybrid. Exactly. That's like the easiest way to put it is with the blended learning model, if you're actually going to implement it, you are requiring your students to do both. So they're supposed to do a certain amount of hours and they're supposed to come to class. So they're supposed to do both because you're going to work the 2 together. Hybrid, it's going to be like they go face-to-face classes, but they can do the distance learning curriculum in addition to that. How your program sets that up is up to you. But like with our program, we set it up where face-to-face was the requirement and the distance learning curriculum was optional, but encouraged.
This is our final slide, and we went kind of fast, and we did have some confusing pieces. I appreciate your comments because that only helps us tweak this to be better. But we do hope that when you leave today, that you can explain what the major points are of the policy of distance education. Meaning what is a proxy hour, what is a direct contact hour. How many hours do you have to have of direct hours before you can count the proxy hours? You want to be able to identify what double dipped means and how, what not to do. You want to be able to tell someone, oh, you can find the approved list of curriculum on the TCAL website under the Distance Learning and Tech Integration Institute page. You can tell somebody the difference between the 3 models of how we track distance learning. And then, briefly be able to understand and distinguish the difference between distance learning blended and then hybrid and remote. Again, I apologize for the confusing slide, but we're taking your comments to heart and we'll probably take that one out. And, Lori made a note of the orientation piece. So we'll make sure that that's clarified for all of you in writing, because I think a couple of you wanted to know that in writing.
So we're going to continue with Career Pathway Services in Texas, intensive service models. So the first one I'm going to talk about is your workplace literacy employer engagement model. We'll start by just mentioning the strategic plan, which once again, we've been reinforcing the strategic plan and what role it plays in our overall vision and support for our programs. So this goal specifically is to address support increases in employment, higher education, skill gains, secondary completion that integrates services and leverage community partnerships. So it's really increasing employment and skill gains within the workforce. So we call this area intensive services. There are 3 models. And we're going to focus on all 3 of them this morning, just briefly. And I'm going to start with workplace literacy. So workplace adult education and literacy activities, we call it workplace literacy and teams. I think it's called work-based AFLA. So these activities are provided by a provider, adult education providers, in collaboration with an employer or an employee organization. That's a possibility. And they're really designed to improve the productivity of the workforce and can occur at a workplace or an off-site location that addresses the needs of a specific employer or employee organization. In workplace AEL programs, okay, so in workforce AEL programs, providers should really respond to the demands of the employer and what drives the business needs. Is it an employee safety issue? Is it helping people with digital literacy skills? But it's very much attuned to that individual employer. Now, I know a lot of people are already working with a lot of businesses. I know it's been harder this last year over the pandemic. Could you all put in the chat pod some of the employers that you've been working with? I go into Teams and often find that out, or look at your surveys that you submit. Surveys are required to be submitted for this pathway also. So if you just put in the chat pod any particular employer, that would be great to know as we go along here. So we do increase your allocations for your workplace literacy services, and it's an additional $250. In previous years, we provided $500. So we're looking again at how we can better help you report those activities. Typically, these are just additional activities and resources that you would spend to develop customized curriculum, for example.
And we've had some people respond with Tyson Foods, nursing homes, and construction industry.
Oh, great. Thank you, Olga. I hadn't seen that yet. I appreciate that. Good. I know we've got a lot of employers across the state that have started to come back and ask us at our office about services. So we do move them over to you and get you connected as much as possible. And if you ever need specialized support, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I know we've done with Tyson, and we were looking at UniFirst, where we were looking at kind of a statewide approach because they wanted to get support in all of their plants in the state. So that's always a possibility. If you have a particular employer, please reach out to us if you need support. We do have some guidance in our policy for adult education and literacy at the workplace. And these are the same guidance documents that we've been talking about over the last couple of days. Here specifically, all right, there we go. So specifically, here's some areas, and this should be in the PowerPoint you got in the PDF file. If you want to look up specific areas where we reference workplace literacy, in your RFP 320-1801 and the pages it reference, there's pages in your AEL guide. There's one letter because it speaks about the syllabus, which is a requirement across all your programs. And then in your contract and also in the Q&A. Again, participants do need to meet eligibility for services. So that is something when you're working with an employer, you want to be clear with upfront who you can serve and who may be ineligible for your services. There is one prohibition that's currently in place. We haven't removed this. I don't know if it will be removed for the next program year, but we have been asked to look into it. So this was written up, and this is probably the only place where you can see the written guidance on this, is that public employers cannot be the focus of your employer engagement. It does not apply that you cannot serve employees that work at public institutions, but this was a unique element of the RFP in the previous program solicitation.
And
yes,
we have a comment from Denise. She says, I have not done workplace literacy as I struggle a bit with where that ends and where we can just move into an IET instead. Don't want to get off task, but if anyone has insight to help me with this, that she would like their input.
Gosh, that's a great differentiation. And actually, I'm going to have to check on that. So basically, Denise, what you're saying is really, the workplace literacy prohibition, you understand, but does it apply to integrated education and training with public employers? Is that kind of the question you're asking?
I'm going to unmute myself for just a second and try not to get everybody off task, but I'm
That's
just going to
okay.
say, I always end up, I guess, when I start talking to somebody where I think it might be workplace literacy, I always move into, well, why don't we do an IET? Like, why don't we actually do a certification? And so, and I see that already some people are answering, but I think I end up never doing it, even if I start out thinking I'm going to do it, because I move to the IET. So I feel like I'm missing something.
No, actually, I think you brought up a good topic, and I can't provide any clarification right now, actually, because I actually understood the prohibition to be services, whether it was just workplace literacy, like regular basic skills in the workplace, or an IET with public employers. And typically, this came about just from, well, really looking closely at whether if you are a provider, let's say under the umbrella of a public institution, and as a provider, you might turn around and train the employees into your institution, which normally would be the responsibility of your institution. You know, for instance, cafeteria workers. So that has been a prohibition. So I see people are asking for more information, and I appreciate that. And I'll actually take it back to Mahalia, because the only written guidance we've put out on that has been in the Q&A. And yet I know it's a struggle, because we know there's a lot of individuals who work at, ISD cafeterias who could move up if they had an opportunity to get their high school equivalency. And that was certainly a robust service that people provided over the last number of years. So it has been a constraint, and I know Mahalia has brought it up with management.
Okay, so there were those questions, and I think you just responded to that about serving cafeteria workers. And then somebody else said, can we work with municipalities and ISDs?
No, that's actually part of that prohibition. Now, it usually came up under the umbrella of an ISD that was a provider and turning around and providing what would be basic education services in-house to employees. So let me get a little bit more granular on that with Mahalia, and let me also check to see if there's any possibility that that's going to be removed before the next RFA.
Okay, and Anne, I just wanted to say that back when I was looking into this, when I was a director and I was working with the site-based workplace, I think that they said that we could not, because those entities receive state and federal funds like we do. Is that right, or is that not the reason?
That was not the reason that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
But you
Okay.
bring up a good concept, and I'm writing that down, because we probably ought to make sure when we change this, we have all the dots connected, as we keep saying. And I see Gracie's asking if a student isn't hired by the ISD yet. And I know there are some programs that might be working with individuals that, for instance, a bus driving program, and they haven't yet been hired, but the intention is that they will go to that, a certain ISD. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem at all. So on this slide, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about some of the partners. We know that Workforce Solutions, your employer services division of your workforce board, we have many of our AEL grantees who are working closely with their employer services division, and may even accompany them on visits when they get to know employers to see if there's a need for basic skills instruction. That's a great way to kind of fast track yourself to those employers, and to have a partner actually in that opportunity, and someone who's very used to having communications with businesses and industry. Institutions of higher ed, if you're at one of those, skills development fund, many of you all may know that there's a percentage of those funds that can be used for basic skills, and that's out of their skills development grant itself. But you could come in and fill the gap. Let's say your institution is a skills development grant with a manufacturing company, and they have a large group of line workers who really need a second language, English instruction, or they need basic skills or safety reading in the workplace, whatever it is. You could come in and fill the gap after they've reached their 10% of allowable funds and their skills development, and you could support those individuals under your AEL money. So that's another partner. Also often corporate customized training divisions in an institute of higher ed. They're always visiting with business and industry and able to support. They may be looking for an entity that can really come in and do that support for the entry-level workers. Apprenticeship programs, of course, those are work-based programs, and so they're got employer partners. They're a great program to partner with, even if you're doing like math remediation while they're in an apprenticeship program itself. So good partnership and lots of ways you can work with those entities. So this next slide is really just reinforcing integration with your system, your college system. So seeking out employer partners. We have some guidance. As I said, we're going to be have some new professional development over the next year or so. And this is one area that I really want to be able to expand and bring some good professional development to our programs who aren't used to interacting with business and industry and really need some support in going out and outreaching, supporting that first communication, and also building an MOU with the business. You want to go into that with your eyes open. You want to be able to work with the employer, answer their questions and meet their needs. And they have a whole different agenda most usually. And here I'm just sharing a few resources. I don't have very many slides in this workplace literacy. The most discussion I usually get is around public employers. And we don't really have any, and I may be wrong, Olga, but professional development that's particularly centered on our, outreach to employers. So we're hoping to look at improving that for you all and looking at what your needs are for professional development to do better engagement with our employers.
We actually did have a session that we had created a while back on that. We have several actually, but they're not requested very frequently.
Well, we may have to disseminate more information about them. I'm glad. So are they online portal pieces?
No, actually they were face to face. So maybe that's something that we could work on is getting that as a online session.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up. So we'll talk more about that later because we do want to support engagement with employers, and you have lots of opportunities at times, but really managing that communication can be a challenge if you haven't been in that environment. Another reason why we really recommend working with your board partners too. And these are just some good resources that are out there that are linked on our website here for you. Links has a very good engagement community about employers. There's lots of good material out there. So I recommend checking in with that also. This is just kind of a look at employer engagement and overall in workforce development programs, whether it's at an institution and a college, and how that kind of schematic is seen from that perspective. Here are a few tips that we usually recommend. Obviously, work with any of your partners, your board partners, your internal college divisions. Learn the language of the business and their needs. Reach out to senior level executives in the company if that's, the kind of direct connection. Usually there may be an identified person who really works with these kinds of programs and providing these kind of benefits, because they're really benefits to an employee in the company. And engage employers or an individual that they can assign to work with you in any kind of design or content. You want to particularly meet their needs. They may come in with a very specific need. People are still opening the exit door that has, we've given consistent directions on what time periods you have to avoid, et cetera. So reading signs, paying attention to safety, et cetera, are typical areas where employers want you to focus to help them. It's a lot cheaper to keep an employee and keep them trained than to hire and train a new employee and try them out. Well, to fill the workforce gaps that they have. And then ask for feedback. Make sure that you do touch base with the connection that you have at the company and that what you're doing is meeting their needs, and then regularly communicate. And then help the companies celebrate success. That's one thing that programs often like to do, to be able to recognize employee participation and employee successes. And then, of course, in all of the programs, workforce preparation activities are included. And this is an area where I often highlight digital literacy skills. Digital literacy skills are embedded in workforce preparation activities, and we're hearing from more and more employers that digital literacy skills are really a gap in their workforce, and they've learned that even more clearly over the last year. I want to recommend, and I think there are a few of these posted on our website. The National Skills Coalition has done an excellent series of briefs on employee skills, digital literacy skills in different areas, manufacturing, healthcare, et cetera, and really taken a dive to look at, where are we as a country in our digital literacy skills for those people that are employed and working and yet maybe not keeping up with technology. And then, of course, you're required to have a syllabus. So I'm going to kind of keep beating those two drums there. It's in the syllabus, and find a way to integrate workforce preparation activities. And then the last piece on this is really about an MOU with the business. This is a good place to kind of outline the general agreement that you have, what you're going to do, and how you're going to provide services. Signing off on the expectations and your outcomes is a good idea also, and putting it all in writing. So that was a pretty Reader's Digest version, I think. Let's see, is there anything in the chat pod? And let me see if I can pull up the next piece here.
And there were just some comments in terms of, Gracie mentioned she had the question about what if the student isn't hired yet? But one of the things is if she says that the students of the college and the classes on campus, they have a pipeline with the local ISD of folks that applied but didn't meet the qualifications. So they send them to the college and they train them, and that they can reapply and get hired. So that's technically an IET, and that's what Denise said. If they take the educational aid and the paraprofessional assessment, then that's an IET. And then Denise also says that this is an exam for state certification as an educational aid. She only sees IET. She's trying to see workplace. I think majority of workplace right now is done with private employers as opposed to
Yes.
those in the government or government funded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is primarily, we have a lot of, on a normal year, we have a lot of programs that work definitely a lot with private employers. That's obviously the main focus, if not completely the focus. I can't think of any other service model. If you're not a public employer, you'd be a private employer. And yeah, thanks, Denise. That's great information on the Parapro assessment. And that makes a lot of sense, Gracie, that and actually a great pipeline that they're sending them to the college and giving you that opportunity to help remediate and get them into those jobs. I mean, that's somebody that's already got a commitment and wants to be in that field. So an excellent kind of partnership. So that makes a lot of sense. So I think I'm understanding, Denise, what you were talking about and splitting the baby there between workplace literacy and an IET. Okay, so we're up and running. I think you can see, are you still seeing my?
Yes, ma'am. Adult Educational Literacy and Texas Service for Internationally Trained Professionals.
Great. Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, this is an absolutely fabulous area in our intensive services, and something that we are now going to continue to expand. Over the last several years, there's been a great work group. I think we've got a number of those people. Denise, for sure, she's been a great participant in the work group on serving internationally trained professionals and helping to lead that group of informal participants. So if you're actually working with that work group that's developing tools to improve services to internationally trained, put that in the chat pod, because I want to shout out to y'all that y'all been doing a lot of work to really give a good profile to this population and to better support them. We know that a lot of English language learners, especially those that are internationally trained with degrees from their home country, desperately want to get back into their career pathway. And they often find adult ed because, word of mouth is very strong in that community in terms of, hey, where can I get some English language classes, et cetera. So the referral pipeline is very good. And they turn up in our classes, and we want to make sure that they get the support they need, or get the referral they need, or get the services they need. So for this section on on intensive services, we're going to look more deeply at who the skilled immigrant population is under TWC, look at activities and services that are aligned for internationally trained professionals, and refer to the policy and guidance that exists. And I want to say that the individuals that have been very engaged with our community of internationally trained professionals, if you're out there and on this call, don't hesitate to jump in. We've had a core group that has been working on developing a TOT for the state, and have been working on career pathway a guide in particular for education. So once again, this is an intensive service, and we do have the additional money that we give towards these activities for internationally trained professionals. So for us in adult education and literacy, it's really all about finding meaningful pathways. I have some data that we pulled actually over a year ago, and it indicated that we were getting a lot of these individuals that checked on their Pearl intake form that they had a degree from their home country. And we had a very large number across the state, not as many, but still large, stayed in over 12 hours. So over this last year, we've been working to refine the data system. And as you all may not know this, but it is back up and working so that you can pull a report to see how many people in your under your grantee have indicated on their Pearl that they have a degree from their home country. That's very useful. I'm in the process of doing it for all the providers because I want to know how many are out there, and we want to look at this deeper. I think there's a how-to list. I did one for the Fall Institute last year, how to look at those numbers. We will find that and send that out again. But this is a population that needs specialized services, and that's why we've umbrellaed it under intensive services. So you can take some time and have a little bit of extra money to provide them with the extra services that they need. So who is it that we're talking about? First of all, English language learner is defined as someone who has limited ability, whose native language is something other than English, or lives in a family or community where a language other than English is dominant. And when you look at this in the under the umbrella of a skilled immigrant, someone who has a degree and has indicated that they have a career from a home country, maybe they were displaced, they worked as a highly skilled professional, and often, there might be somebody who had to leave their country without a lot of documentation. Maybe there was trauma and conflict in their country, et cetera. So those individuals want to get back onto their pathway, and they come into the US, but there's the concept of brain waste in terms of they're highly skilled, highly trained, and yet we're unable to help them better integrate in the US and use those skills that they come with. So they're either unemployed or they have jobs that are really below their educational skill level. There's a real emotional impact, I think, on these individuals because if someone has a career, they're usually very committed to that work, and being displaced from a home country or choosing to leave a home country for whatever reason, an individual wants to get back on their career pathway. So that's why we've sectioned out this population, because they are already looking to be engaged in the workforce, and we want to be able to support that.
And before you continue, there were a couple of questions. So Lorraine asked, which report is this? I think you had mentioned a report.
Yes, and I mentioned a report that you can pull out of Teams. And thank you, Lorraine. I didn't mention it was a Teams report. It is actually a Teams report. You can go in there and I do a POP report in Teams. And when you pull out a POP report, what you do is request information in a participant profile for someone who has indicated in their PEARL that they have a degree from another country. And you'll get a large drop-down menu. Maybe I can show that to the group, on our follow-up calls on this. But you get a large group of check marks for levels of education. And you just check somebody who has indicated they have a degree from their home country. It will populate in the POP report the individuals who indicated that. So that's a quick look at, did they come into your program and get assessed? They may not be yet a participant, but it's a POP report in Teams. Thanks for asking that, Lorraine. I didn't mention that.
Okay, and then Paul mentioned a question, but it was mentioned yesterday. He says, I know this was mentioned yesterday about individuals from Puerto Rico. So he said about what you were talking about earlier, does that include Puerto Rico?
And that's the way we've responded to that question is that it does not. I'm not sure. I think we need to keep looking at that, because I know a lot of individuals, and even some I know personally from Puerto Rico, have really been in a school system for which they may have been taught, the book may have been in English, but they were taught in Spanish. So, there's a lot of cross-cultural work going on there. And we have said since they are a territory, that would not be somebody who's from outside the US. So that's where we are right now. Know that individual from Puerto Rico would not be an internationally trained professional that you can serve in your ITP program. With additional services. Now, so we'll just stop there. And I appreciate everybody keeps bringing it back up. They definitely, it's just definitely a challenge to be to do anything different right now.
And there's another question. It says currently that POP report filtered by educational level gives an error report. Is Teams working on a fix?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it was fixed about 2 weeks ago. So I actually haven't looked in 2 weeks. So if you've done it recently, maybe doing it right now, thank you. We'll get it. I'll check it as soon as we're finished with this session, because I'll tell you, that's a great resource to have. And I actually have an itemized list. I think we've shared it with the directors. I'll reshare it once I can get the information from this program year. And it shows exactly how many individuals indicated they had a degree during what year. I've looked at years 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021. I haven't yet looked at 2021 because it's been down. But I'll send that out to the individual programs once I get the 2021 information. And it lists we had 50 people who indicated that on their PEARL. And then in intensive services, I also then look at how many did you actually serve under that umbrella. Sometimes it's a large number, sometimes it's only a small portion of those that might be hidden, and often they're hidden in your ESL classes. So that's something that this work group has worked to bring forward. Olga, you've had them on a number of trained PDs, had them on a number of Workforce Wednesdays or Manager Mondays with how to adapt your intake process so that you can better identify those who are skilled professionals from another country. So, those kinds of recommendations and materials we've shared in webinars, but I'm also looking that maybe we'll be able to do that in more depth over this next year as we look at focusing on all these career pathway models with professional development. So keep the good questions coming and the challenges on some of these populations. We've hit a couple on workplace. We hit our public employers, and then on internationally trained, we've hit the Puerto Rican population.
Thank you, Anne.
And I put this up because this is really an interesting statistic. And I know the healthcare professionals over the pandemic year had really been an asset, and were in many instances in some communities fast tracked to being able to support in the healthcare area. But if you look at this data in terms of immigrants, or 13.7 of the US population, but there are 28% of physicians and surgeons in the US who are degreed from another country in nursing and home health care, psychiatric, 22%, biotechnology workers, 50%. So that's an amazing professional community, that comes in with careers from outside their home country. And, in particular, this is also under WIOA, this is definitely an important group, and an important group for services across our system. So another way that I recommend working with your workforce board to see if there might be some way you can do some specialized services for English language learners who come in degreed that they may be working with. I know Tarrant County has been really proactive at working with their board and identifying individuals, and also seeing that it's an option under board services to do some credential evaluation. From what I know from Tarrant, that may not be true. I don't know across all boards, but your AEL money supports that, to some degree. There's not a lot of extra money there, but we also know that the services for this population, that intensive ESL, is much different than something that you're doing for someone who has a third grade education in their home country. That's why if they're invisible by being in your ESL classes, they will often leave because they aren't getting the kind of rigor and intensity that they need. And often they've been exposed and maybe much more fluent than they demonstrate. And, often it's just, wanting to be very fluent and very proficient and very professional, and having a hesitancy to really use another language, with colleagues or with instructors. So you really have to dig in and learn more about those that you're serving, and identify the industries that may be coming to your program. That's one thing that's not on the Pearl. I wish it was. When somebody indicates that they have a degree from another country, I want to know the industry. I wish we had that check mark in there also. But from a comprehensive assessment approach, after people do the Pearl, which is often the first couple of steps of getting vetted as eligible, we do need that return to what was that information on that form? What did they indicate? I mean, we see their barriers there. Are they working? How many children do they have? Are they not working, and how many children do they have? So revisiting that information is really that next step in being able to provide a more comprehensive approach to meeting their needs, meeting the needs of the learners in your program. Okay, and this is just another one. I'm sharing these because I know there's a lot of interest out there, and a lot of people looking at this issue. We have actually got, I think, we've got a lot of city governments now getting involved in this in Texas. We've got Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, I believe El Paso. I may be leaving out one more city that actually has initiatives designed to identify, recruit, and support skilled immigrants in their communities. A lot of them are just getting off the ground, but this is capturing the attention of a lot of folks, and especially after this year of pandemic services where we know our healthcare professionals were particularly affected and in need in general in our communities. So this is a pretty stunning statistic. 27% of all college-educated immigrants live in Texas. 2/3 are naturalized citizens or green card holders. So making an assumption that they're not here with the ability to work, authorization to work, is a misassumption. So these are great statistics, but we know they're turning up in our ESL classes and probably not not identified as someone as a skilled professional. So this is just further data in the state of Texas. So what kind of barriers do they encounter? They come in from another country. They may be assuming their profession is similarly credentialed or licensed as it is in their home country. So they don't have the information. They need career guidance. There's the academic language barriers that they need. Challenges to actually either getting recertified or having their own credentials honored in the US. That's a particular challenge that many of our adult ed programs are looking at how they can support those certifications. Cost issues, they were highly skilled in their home country and maybe living an upper middle class life. And here in the States, they are in a low wage job. They're unable to support their family, and in particular, suffering from the economic loss and status. And then the gaps in education. There are differences across the world in how systems credential individuals. And one example I'm always reminded of, that when I was in El Paso, our nursing school was desperate to support the individuals coming in from Mexico who were skilled as nurses. And they asked for services to help with cultural integration and cultural integration on their career. Nurses in Mexico could perform different tasks than nurses in the US are allowed to do. So those kinds of differences, are highly nuanced. And we certainly, adult education, reading and literacy instructors aren't the experts on those, but partnering with entities, learning about this, and hopefully with our professional development, that we can just keep increasing awareness of some of the issues that our skilled professionals from other countries are encountering. And then another one is really the lack of professional networks. This is a real support. Once they get into it, you can bring skilled professionals from a variety of industries into one classroom, which is a great way to do it because they have this professional connection. Maybe it's not in the same profession, but they share, that they've had academic backgrounds. And then sometimes you find employer bias. Employer bias just maybe not because they even know that they're skilled, or, but they're often in the low wage jobs at a workplace. And it might be the employer just wasn't aware of the skilled professional attributes of that individual. So our policy is written out in 0615, expansion of eligible population to serve for higher ed. Often these individuals go into the college, they score low on the TSIA if they don't have academic English and they can't do better. They don't want to be in a dev ed class. They might be put in something that, again, they will suffer from not getting the kind of academic support they would in a finely tuned ESL class for professionals that's got an academic rigor to it. So these are all the letters that you need to reference. We give an extra $250. The services and activities are outlined in our 0117. And some of those are the ability to do credential evaluation, comprehensive skilled assessments of skill needs, credential evaluation, needing to do workforce prep. And here are some good resources. If they aren't linked in that PDF document, I'm pretty sure they're on the TCAL website. So looking at comprehensive intake, at the very beginning, we have found over the last 2 years in working with the skilled immigrant program that these are some of the things that you really need to pay attention to. Being able to recruit in this population directly, doing some customized comprehensive assessment, looking at their academic background, accommodating for cultural understandings, misunderstandings, and really developing the kind of rapport and trust with the population. Sometimes people, until they really start to understand the system they've entered into, aren't going to necessarily, be as forthcoming in things they may worry about. What if I tell them I have a degree? Will I be kicked out of this ESL class? So, making an effort to let individuals know that you actually have services for that option is a great way to go about things. Let's see. So also the language proficiency assessment process. One of the reasons why we moved into allowing a non-ESL tool to assess a second language learner, because many of the tools, or the tool that was primarily used at the time, was just inadequate. So these are just some of the things that are helpful when you're looking at designing a comprehensive assessment at your facility to help with intake. And then I've got a bunch of references here. Those should be in the PDF. And I'm going to go on to corrections and spend the last 20 minutes here on corrections. And our subject matter guru on this is Veronica, and she wasn't able to be here today. So I'm going to walk through this. I think I've got a lot of good people probably in the audience that can set me straight if I veer off. But you've probably seen an aspect of this PowerPoint Veronica has provided. It is in the portal, isn't it? Olga, I think.
Yes, we have provided about 3 sessions on corrections and reentry, and they're under Workforce Wednesday. So check those out.
Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started because I have 30 slides. I'm going to try to move through them pretty well and try to cover all of these aspects of corrections and reentry services and provide you with some other resources. So again, we're under the intensive services banner. We are doing transition to reentry and post-release services. We provide that extra bump in the $250 to provide these services. Again, they may be unique and need unique curriculum development or just time for staff members to interact with the correctional facilities. We're lucky, Veronica and I are part of a pilot we're doing with the U.S. Department of Ed. So is Lee College, I think Dallas, and let's see, and Wyndham school districts. And we're really looking at this from a state level perspective to better serve our corrections and our reentry population. So let's look at some definitions. These definitions are in the AEL guide and are on the website. So correctional education is a requirement under WIOA Title II. Services that states must provide to criminal offenders. We are limited in the numbers. We've never had a problem exceeding that. So you don't have to really think about that or worry about it. We monitor and keep an eye on it. A criminal offender is defined as any individual who's charged with or convicted of any criminal offense and who resides in a correctional institution. This is all in the adult education, the AEL guide. So what are correctional institutions? These are any institutions, a prison, a jail, a reformatory, a work farm, detention center, or a halfway house. That's the official definition for a correctional institution, and that is also in your AEL guide. Sorry, there's the halfway house there. So what are reentry and post-release services? Reentry, post-release services are services provided to a formerly incarcerated or individual upon or shortly after release from a correctional institution. I know yesterday we had a question from Abel about can you provide them while they are in an institution? And we did clarify that yes, reentry corrections can be provided while in an institution or shortly after. I know that you all have asked for better clarification in the language in the guide, so we are taking note of that. So either way, while they're within, getting ready to be released or shortly after they have been released. Shortly after release is being defined as up to 3 years after release from a correctional institution. So this is a question also that's on your Pearl information. And so if you were to, if someone indicated that on their intake form, that's, possibly another way of identifying them. You always want to be careful about violating people's confidentiality. That's probably a very difficult thing to, indicate. And you don't want people to be sensitive about sharing that information. But it is a question, it is asked on the Pearl. As a reminder, reentry and post-release services are aimed at helping those individuals that are justice involved. The primary purpose is to help them adjust to the community and obviously to prevent recidivism. Recidivism is the likelihood of justice involved individuals being reincarcerated. So these are super important services. Our state, as a Texas Department of Criminal Justice, has a lot of activity going on with reentry programs. You may run into that when you are at a facility, so you want to be aware of who is there and who has the domain over what services. So this is a highly specific model that you want to look at how you can best design it to serve those that you may have been asked to serve, by perhaps the county sheriff who's running a jail. So we find that those kinds of programs are often, reaching out to an adult ed provider. All of this is in our AEL guide, definitions, everything that you might need is you can find in the guide. And then in this PowerPoint, this is from one that Veronica did. So it's my best go-to. So let's looking at under Title II. Things did change under WIOA because there were some new allowable services. Maybe many of y'all who worked under WIA or under, prior to Title II being under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, you were under, it wasn't clearly under WIOA, but previously there were services that could be provided to individuals who were institutionalized in a corrections facility, but that's been expanded. So that's basically what the slide is about. The slide, the things that have the asterisk on it, integrated education and training, that's actually the work that we're doing with the Department of Ed around IETs and correction facilities. So we will be coming forth with more information on that throughout the year. And in particularly at the end of the year, we anticipate having a guide that will more clearly support the work that you're doing or wanting to do on IETs and correctional facilities. So that's a new activity under WIOA. So is concurrent enrollment, peer tutoring. Peer tutoring is something that is allowable. We do require that, and so do the feds require that there is an instructor of record that is supporting these individuals and providing them with additional resources and overseeing the work within the peer tutoring model. So this is a structured peer tutoring and specifically overseen by educators and setting educational goals and establishing an individualized plan of instruction for each of the participants. The instructor, the AEL instructor would then be tasked with monitoring progress. So lastly, a new service, and this is new under WIOA, is the reentry initiative and post-release services, and that's with the goal of reducing the recidivism. These are the services help people transition back. It includes what we look at as items number 1, 2, 3, and 4, providing adult literacy, maybe ESL or a GED if you don't have a Wyndham school already doing GED at the facility. Let's see, as a reminder, the priority use of these funds must be given to individuals who are likely to return back to the community within 5 years. So for these correctional services, and that's where you're in an actual facility working, weekly, daily, whatever it is with these individuals. The requirement is as a priority that it must be given to individuals who are likely to return back within 5 years. So just knowing that within a correctional institution, that institution is certainly becoming your partner. You are working closely with them to design that class and to set up the services that you're doing on site. So let's see the other aspects. I think I pretty much hit the bulleted points on the new allowable activities. Yes, and priority is for those who are returning to community within 5 years. So what are release and post-release services? A little bit more in the weeds here. And actually, these include services, help them transition. So if there isn't another entity that's already tasked with that, this might be a service that you could do in collaboration with an institution. These items, you could be doing educational counseling. You could be assisting them to develop plans if they're still institutionalized, but very close to release. You could identify and help them apply for participation in post-release programs, and then do some direct outreach to community-based providers. So again, in this construct, you're looking at providing services to those who are likely to return to the community in 5 years if they are still institutionalized. Let's look a little bit more at reentry. Okay, there's a couple of prohibitions. You may not use correctional funds for students to participate in post-release programs. So that's a real important part to be aware of. You may have awareness of those post-release programs and be sharing information with individuals that may be in receiving services, but you cannot use your funds to pay for any of those activities. All activities must take place prior to home placement, and students may be attached to a community-based program already. So these funds may not be used for the costs of participation in those release programs. So just being aware of that, there's a lot of nuance to what is the purview of adult education. You want to stay with providing education, post-secondary, secondary vocational training, technical training, ABE, ASL, in terms of integrated education and training. These are the type of services that a lot of individuals get. These are not necessarily the services that you would provide, but these are what reentry and post-release services are considered really best practices. Especially there's been a new emphasis on family reunification. Things that are non-allowable: parole and probation fees, fees for treatment classes, and housing assistance. Corrections services are, once again, going back and forth, correction services versus reentry. If you are working with someone confined in an institution, that is the individual that you will report as a corrections in your team's reporting. If the reentry corrections is for those that are incarcerated but may be on parole or probation or recently released. And so you want to ensure that those individuals are being referenced, or your services are under the umbrella of reentry. So lots of different kinds of activities. There's a lot of material on media literacy, individuals getting out that you may be working with in your classroom. If you're doing any kind of cohort-based approach, you may find that you're doing a lot of work with digital literacy, with basic skills. These are the ways that you report corrections in teams. You have your basic AEL, AFLA. That's usually just you being in a correction facility and doing basic skills, any kind of ESL, you would actually put your ESL under basic AFLA corrections. So you're working in a facility and you would be using that code. Transition corrections, and that's really supporting individuals and getting skills to transition to post-secondary or employment services. They can be usually outside. That would be inside your correction facility also. Same with IET. So all those that say corrections on the parentheses, or you're doing inside an institution. Reentry is going to be your intensive service model, reentry corrections. And so if you're working with individuals either close to or post-release, that's going to be your reentry services. And that's primarily what we're seeing in programs that do have relationships with certain facilities in their communities. We do see a lot of ESL inside the corrections facility. I will say that there are areas and pockets of the state where that's a focus of some of our providers. And so it just depends on who you're working with in your community. We've gone over that allocation, outcome measures. And now this is an important piece that you want to keep in mind too, that all AEL participants, including those that are in corrections facilities, are required to make a gain or to have an MSG, basic educational gain, per program year. And if they're in an IET, a workforce gain over the program of study. So that is something that is reported for those individuals. Now, those coded with corrections will be counted in exit-based measures unless there's an exclusionary reason. But this is just a refresher that you want to make sure that you do apply an exclusionary reason to those that you're serving inside corrections facilities in case they're in an IET, so they will not populate in your exit-based measures. Credential and employment, obviously. These exclusionary reasons are somebody who might be incarcerated that you already had in a class outside of a facility, and then people who are incarcerated at program entry. Then, in other words, they're already in a facility when you're working with them. So these are other exclusionary reasons that you want to apply that might apply across your population. So not necessarily to corrections, but these are just other exclusionary reasons, and you want to be aware of them because you do want to apply them. You do this inside teams so that they are excluded from your exit-based measures. foster care individuals, people who are called in by the National Guard. And then collaborating with a new facility. There's going to be a point of contact. You're doing a cold call. I don't know if anybody who's still on the call has done that and might want to share about that. But there's a lot of preparation, I think, to get started. And I highly recommend that you touch base with a colleague, call Veronica, call our office. Let us support you in any way we can. If you're getting ready to do kind of a cold call because you'd like to be able to support these individuals that you're finding are turning up in your class anyway. So lots of, kind of details to make sure you're aware of as you're starting those conversations, and how to best actually develop a relationship with a facility so that you can be a long-term supporter of individuals once they are, transitioning to the outside. So some of the best practices, instructional vetting, very important to find a good fit for your instructor. We know that there's a great group of instructors who do this work, very passionate about it. You want to ensure that instructor that you're sending into a facility is ready for that if they've not done that before. There are targeted populations in terms of looking at facilities with longer minimum lengths of stay, asking about a population turnover in your initial conversations. Sometimes you can start working with this. I know Mick from Lee College can talk about this in terms of someone comes into a program and, people are released without a lot of notice. So, finding out if they're being transferred within an institution or, what the timeline requires a lot of interfacing with the facility and the leads at the facility. So you just want to ensure that you're able to do that. Collaboration, frequent communication, get your roles established up front, knowing who and when students are being released. That is always a challenging area, and to look for additional support. We've got some support at TCAL with resources and on the website. Texas Department of Criminal Justice has, a huge guidance in regards to what areas they are supporting individuals in the processes. I'm learning a lot myself from this pilot. We are working in collaboration with the Department of Criminal Justice and with Wyndham Schools. So I think we're going to have a lot more support to give you all as you go forward, and we will be able to just address questions in a more specific way. So Veronica's our great subject matter expert here. So I hope I've given you kind of a broad overview and brought some kind of light to the discussion.
Thank you, Anne. There is actually that reentry education toolkit is in the correctional and reentry community of practice in the PD portal. It might be reentry corrections or correctional reentry, but look for that community of practice in the PD portal. But this resource, the reentry toolkit, is in the community of practice. So you could go in there and grab that.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you, Anne.
excellent. And it's also on your website under Institutes for Career Pathways. So you can look there, see the Veronica has a lot of resources there we put up for y'all. And a lot of these pieces we've mentioned are on that direct access via the TCAL website. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody, for sticking in there. We have 54 people still, Anne. So
Oh
awesome.
my gosh. Well, I'm going to stay for a few minutes, Olga, if that's okay. Just I know we didn't even give anybody too much chance to ask questions unless, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We have a lot of thank yous. So y'all have a great day. Thank you, Anne. So much information. I agree. Can we go back to the orientation in hours?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. Why don't we do that in the first Q&A that we do for follow-up, Gracie? Great question. Send that in to AELTA so we make sure it's a priority. I think I heard some of that discussion. We want to get good clarity on that. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you. Oh yeah, Maria put the email address in the chat. So if you have any questions,
you,
send
Maria.
it to aelta@twc.state.tx.us. Thank you, Maria. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the room, everybody. So
Thanks, Olga. You
thank
take-
you. Have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye, everybody.